The creature. Okay. When he reached when he reached the classroom, he was surprised to see Jennifer Morse sitting there in the second row, second seat in. When she saw Samuel, this is all handwritten, honey. It's not. I didn't even type it out or anything. It's all written by hand. When she saw Samuel walk in, she smiled and directed him to sit in the seat beside her. Eager at her directions, he calmly walked to the seat next to her, sat down, and looked at her just in time to see her pretty dimples and her face blushing a slight tone of red. Samuel was surprised that she was showing her interest in him like she was. He had expected that she already had a boyfriend and that he would never get the chance to take her out. During the class, he slipped her another note that asked, "Is there anything special you'd like to do on Friday night?" She passed it over back to him after writing, "Call me tonight and we'll talk." Sammy went through the rest of the day with his concentration half on schoolwork and the other half on calling Jennifer that night. After school, Sammy gave Andrew Parks a ride home, another good friend of his from school, and then went right home himself. When he got home, he found a note on the table from his mother asking him to take out the trash and feed the dog before doing his homework. Samuel did as his mother asked, but not before making himself a snack. Ham, cheese, and mayo on wheat bread was his favorite snack after coming home from school. When he finished his sandwich, he took out the trash and fed the dog, and went up to his room to begin working on his homework. Where it was the first day of school, he didn't have much homework, so it only took him about 30 minutes to do it. Once he finished his homework, he slowly went down the steps and watched TV for about 2 hours. He then realized that it was almost 6:30 and he still needed to call Jennifer. His mom and dad had been home since 5 o'clock and had been at the kitchen table going over the budget. Sammy went upstairs to his room to use the phone to call Jennifer so he could have some privacy while he talked to her. He was hoping that she would answer the phone and not her mom or dad. The phone rang 2 times, then the sweetest voice answered. "Hello?" It was Jennifer. Sammy was relieved at the sound of her voice. They talked for 2 hours without even realizing it. Then both of them decided it would be best to get off the phone for now and talk more tomorrow. Samuel hung up the phone. Uh, Samuel hung up the phone, lay down on his bed, and thought about the long conversation he had just finished with Jennifer. He was amazed when she had told him that she had been interested in him their whole junior year, but he never asked her out. He was kicking himself now for not having the nerve to ask her out last year. At least he got the chance to take her out. Huh. Oh, wait a minute. Okay. Take her out now, though. And they decided to go to Rollerland on Friday night and then maybe catch a movie. Samuel honestly wanted to skip Rollerland because he hadn't been on roller skates since he was about 8 or 9 years old. He told Jennifer that he wasn't very good at roller skating, but he promised him she'd catch him if he fell. So that's what made the thought of going a little easier. Honey, you okay?
I'm fine.
Okay. Samuel laid on his bed a while longer, thinking about his date with Jennifer on Friday night, and finally fell asleep, still in his clothes he wore to school that day. When he awoke the next morning, he was a little more anxious to get to school because his first two classes of the day were with Jennifer. When he arrived at school and got situated in his seat, he turned and talked to Jennifer almost right up until the bell rang, except for the one time he got interrupted by his friend Vernon, who just wanted to see if Samuel could give him a ride home after school that day. Samuel had also asked Jennifer if she would like him to give her a ride home. After school, Samuel and Jennifer walked out to Samuel's car and found that Vernon and Andrew were both there waiting. Samuel unlocked the front door for Jennifer to get in first. Then he went around to the other side and pushed the power lock button to unlock the other doors for Andrew and Vernon. After they were all situated in the car, they headed out of the high school drive and onto the main road, which was named Nolansville Road. Once on the road, Andrew and Vernon both said hello to Jennifer. "Hello," Jennifer answered back. "How are the two of you doing?" she asked. They both answered back, "Good. How are you doing?" Andrew asked. Jennifer answered, "I'm doing fine, thank you." "Are you two dating each other now?" Vernon asked. Samuel didn't say anything and waited for Jennifer to answer. "Yes, we are," Jennifer replied. Samuel was relieved when Jennifer answered. After Samuel dropped off Vernon and Andrew, he proceeded to drive Jennifer home. Once in her drive, she turned and asked him, "So now that we're a couple, does that mean that I get a kiss before I get out of the car?" Samuel smiled as he looked at Jennifer with a blush on his face. If you don't mind me kissing you right now, then it would be my pleasure," Samuel answered back. Samuel leaned over and gave Jennifer a long kiss, then got out and walked her to the front door of her house. He kissed her one more time before turning back to his car and heading home for the day. Chapter 2. Let me see. It was now Friday night, and Samuel was getting himself ready for his date with Jennifer. He looked at the clock, and it read 6:30. Wondering as he I had to read this in someone else. Wondering as he was putting on his cologne if he should leave in the next 5 minutes to pick her up, or if showing up early would make her have to rush to finish getting ready. He decided he would wait another 10 minutes and then leave. Jennifer's house was only about 10 minutes from his, and he would rather be early than late. As he drove in her drive and put his car in park, he noticed that she had not immediately opened the door. He decided that the polite thing for him to do would be to get out of the car and go to the door to get her. That would also make a good first impression on her parents because he knew they would be watching and waiting to meet the boy that was taking out their only daughter. Jennifer wasn't an only child. She has a brother, but he's about 6 or 7 years older than her, and her parents are quite protective of her because she is their baby. He approached the front door and rang the doorbell. A man about 6 feet tall with graying beard and a baseball cap on answered the door. "You must be Samuel," the man exclaimed. "Yes, sir," Samuel replied. "My name is John. I'm Jennifer's dad," he said as he held his hand out to shake Samuel's hand. Samuel noticed the tight grip that the man had and returned the handshake with a firm grip of his own. but not so firm as to try to overpower the man. Samuel didn't want Jennifer's dad to think anything bad about him or try to leave a first impression of toughness with the bigger man. Please come in, John said. Samuel stepped a few feet in the house and noticed an older. Oh, that doesn't really make sense to me. Because I didn't get a chance to fix that, obviously. And noticed an older woman standing in the kitchen cooking what looked like dinner for two. The lady walked over and introduced herself to Samuel. Hi, Samuel. My name is Christine. She reached out and shook his hand after wiping it on her apron. Hi, ma'am, Samuel replied. Jennifer should be right down. She said as she turned to go back into the kitchen. Jennifer's parents made small talk with Samuel until Jennifer came down the stairs. Samuel looked at her with magnetic eyes. She was only wearing jeans and a t-shirt with some writing on it because they were going roller skating, but she was still very beautiful to him. I hope you don't mind that I didn't dress up too much since I were going roller skating, she asked Samuel. What you're wearing is perfect, and you still look beautiful in it, he replied. Jennifer blushed a slight shade of red and thanked him for the compliment. I'm ready to go when you are, she said after she gave her mom and dad a hug and kiss on the cheek. It was nice to meet you, Mr. and Mrs. Moore, Samuel said as he opened the door and let Jennifer walk out first. It was nice to meet you too, Samuel, Mr. Moore replied. As Samuel walked Jennifer to the car and opened the door for her, he let her know how nervous he was about meeting her parents and how he hoped he left a good first impression on them. After Samuel got himself in the car, Jennifer said, I talked to my parents about you all week and told them how you liked me for the last 2 years, but could never find the nerve to ask me out. She chuckled as she looked at him. What did they say about that? Samuel asked. My dad said that was a sign of a guy that must really think very highly of you if he finds so much in you that it takes him 2 years to ask you out on a date, she replied, blushing after repeating to Samuel what her dad had said. Honey, you still there? Okay. I couldn't hear the background noise, so I didn't know if you were there or not. Samuel smiled a guilty smile and reached for Jennifer's hand. She took his hand with a look of softness in her eyes and happiness on her face. Once they arrived at Rollerland, Samuel got out of the car, walked around to Jennifer's door, and opened it for her. They held hands as they walked up to the entrance door and walked inside. The skating rink was full of all different aged people, from 4 years old to some in their 60s. Samuel paid their admission before they went to the counter to retrieve the skates they needed in their size. After getting on their skates, they started toward the rink. Samuel was happy at the sight of the railing as he grabbed it and attempted to catch up to Jennifer. Jennifer looked back to see Samuel stiff-legged and hanging on for dear life to the railing. All she could do was laugh as she skated toward him and reached her hand out for his. Samuel anxiously took her hand. As they started out onto the rink, Jennifer finally persuaded Samuel to let go of the railing. He looked like a newborn calf standing on its legs for the first time. Jennifer tried to show him how to push off with a skate, but when he attempted it, his legs just kept going further apart until he was almost in a split-like position. That's funny because I can picture it. I've done it before. The only way that he could see to get out of his turmoil was to just make himself fall on his butt. Once he was sitting on the floor, he maneuvered himself around so he could try to stand on his feet again. The only thing Jennifer could do was laugh after seeing Samuel do the split. Samuel grabbed the railings, pulled himself back to his feet, and looked at Jennifer and smiled. "I'm guessing that I did something wrong when I did that," he said. Jennifer rolled over to him, gave him a kiss, then grabbed his hand and began teaching him once again. He was able to start moving on his own after a while and started enjoying himself a little more when he could. After about 2 hours of roller skating, Samuel's legs started to hurt. They decided that it was time to go and watch a movie. After taking off his skates, Samuel decided to sit back down for a minute. He almost fell when he stood up the first time after removing his skates because he felt like they were still on and like he was still rolling. Once he was able to stand without a weird feeling of rolling, they returned their skates and headed for the theater. After watching their movie, Samuel drove Jennifer home. "Are you doing anything tomorrow?" Samuel asked. "Not that I know of," she replied. "Would you like to come over to my house tomorrow and meet my parents and maybe have dinner?" he asked. "Yes, I would," she replied and gave Samuel a kiss on the lips. Samuel got out of the car, went around to Jennifer's side, and opened the door for her. "What time would you like to come over tomorrow?" Samuel asked as he was walking to her front door. "That depends on how much time you want to spend with me tomorrow," she replied as she squeezed his hand and looked at him with a blushing grin. Samuel thought for a minute. He would love to spend the whole day with her, but knew that he'd have to help his dad cut the grass and rake the leaves in the morning. "How about 2 o'clock?" he said. "2 will be fine," Jennifer replied. She gave him a hug and a long kiss and turned to go in the house as she slowly let go of his hand. He waited until she was in the house, then he started walking to his car and headed for home. The next morning, Samuel did everything he could to make sure the lawn was cut and the leaves were raked by noontime. That way he'd have plenty of time to get something to eat, take a shower, and get ready to go pick up Jennifer by 2 o'clock. At 2 o'clock, Samuel was at Jennifer's front door, talking to her mom and waiting for Jennifer to finish getting ready. You could see why Jennifer was as sweet as she was after talking to her mom. Her mom would speak at him with a soft tone in her voice and a way about her that showed that she was really interested in his future and really cared. And like she really cared. He enjoyed talking to her. Jennifer came down the stairs and apologized to Samuel for taking so long to get ready. "I wanted to make sure I looked good for meeting your parents for the first time," she explained. Samuel just smiled as he turned to say goodbye to Jennifer's mom. It was nice getting to talk to you a little, Mrs. Moore," he said. "It was nice getting to talk to you more too, Samuel," she replied. When Jennifer and Samuel got to Samuel's house, his mom and dad came to the front door to meet Jennifer. They were both taken by her right away and could tell Samuel really liked her a lot. The way she held herself was in a very ladylike fashion. The slight shy way about her was cute, but not shy so that you couldn't get her to talk back to you. And the politeness that she held was something that his parents thought was completely part of the past. From that day on, Samuel and Jennifer became inseparable. They were each other's best friends. By the time Christmas came around, they both had met each other's whole family and had spent the holidays with them. Both families had made Samuel and Jennifer feel like they had always been part of their families. February 14th had come around. It was Valentine's Day, and Samuel had something special planned for him. And Jennifer had something special planned for him and Jennifer that evening. He had been saving up his money that he had been earning from working part-time at the grocery store in town. He wanted to take her to the most expensive restaurant in town before he handed her an engagement ring and asked her to marry him. It was 6 in the evening, and Samuel was walking up to the door to Jennifer's house. He was wearing cream-colored... He was wearing cream... For a minute, I thought he was wearing cream-colored dress. There was something fucked up there. He was wearing cream-colored dress pants, a light blue long-sleeved dress shirt with a cream-colored tie with red and blue stripes going at one angle on it. He had a single red rose he had bought for Jennifer in his sweaty and shaky hand. As he approached the door, he reached his hand out to ring the doorbell, but before he could, Jennifer had opened the door. She looked so beautiful, all Samuel could do was stare at her. His mouth wanted to move to tell her how beautiful she looked, but no words would come out. She bent in and gave him a kiss, and it brought him out of his trance state that he was in. "You don't have to say anything. I see it on your face when you look at me," Jennifer explained as she smiled and blushed. Samuel smiled back and handed the rose to her. He took her hand and walked her to the car. As he opened the door for her to let her in the car, he whispered in her ear, "You're beautiful," then gave her a kiss on the cheek. When they arrived at the fancy restaurant, Samuel walked over to the other side of the car to open the door for Jennifer. After she was out of the car, he told her that he had forgotten his wallet in the glove compartment and had to get it. She waited there for him as he reached into the glove compartment and cautiously slipped the engagement ring into his pocket without her seeing. They walked into the restaurant hand in hand and was seated at a quiet corner table for two. Come on, honey, I gotta take a drink. They ordered their dinners, and the waiter lit a single candle that was placed in the center of the table. They began talking as they waited for their meal to be delivered to their table. "What do you want for the future?" Samuel asked Jennifer as his hand reached for hers. I've learned from my parents, Jennifer replied, that there's nothing more important in life than having someone in it that will always be there for you and always be your best friend no matter what the situation is that you find yourself in. Oh, okay. I lost myself there for a minute. What my parents have together is what I want for my future, she answered. Before Samuel could say any more, the waiters interrupted them with their meals. Samuel could barely swallow his food, much less finish his whole plate from the butterflies in his stomach of what he was about to do, even though the food was delicious. You've barely touched your food, Samuel, Jennifer said as she grew concerned. Are you feeling all right? She asked. Yes, I'm fine, Samuel answered. Then why aren't you eating your dinner? She asked. Because I have a question to ask you and it's making me nervous, Samuel replied. The look on Jennifer's face grew with great concern. Is this our breakup dinner? She asked. Samuel realized then that he was making her worried. So he got out of his chair, knelt down in front of her, and pulled the ring out of his pocket. When Jennifer saw the engagement ring, she started to cry as Samuel started saying, Jennifer, I love you with all my heart. Will you marry me? Yes, she replied, and gave Samuel a hug and a kiss after he put the ring on her finger. Samuel was finally able to finish his meal after asking Jennifer the question that had put so many butterflies in his stomach. When they finished their meal, Samuel paid the bill, and they went to Samuel's house to watch a movie. His parents were gone for the evening. They knew they could have some time to themselves. In the middle of the movie, their closeness had grown closer to where they were laying down, cuddling on the couch. Samuel was barely even watching the movie because he was busy staring at Jennifer and smiling because of his happiness in her answering yes to his question. Jennifer also was barely watching the movie because she kept staring at her new engagement ring Samuel had given her. Samuel lowered his lip down and kissed Jennifer on the cheek. Then Jennifer turned to look up at Samuel, and he kissed her on the lips. The more they kept close contact with each other's lips, the harder it was for the rest of their bodies to take its natural. That should have been. The harder it was for the bodies to take its natural course. Before they knew it, neither one of them could fight back the love they held for each other at that moment, and neither of them wanted to. This was part of the night that wasn't planned. After giving into the love they felt for each other, they lay there staring at each other. Sammy would play with her hair and rub his hand across her cheek and tell her that he loved her. Jennifer would smile and say, "I love you too." Chapter 3. The next few weeks went by, and Samuel and Jennifer were supposed to go on a hike with some friends. Jennifer hadn't been feeling good, and she knew why because she had already had it confirmed by her doctor. She was pregnant. She had told her parents, but hadn't told Samuel yet. She planned on telling him that day on the hike. They had met up with Vernon and his girlfriend. Holly and Andrew and his girlfriend, Whitney, at the base of Mount Katahdin at 8 o'clock that morning. Mount Katahdin, honey, is in Maine. It's the highest mountain in Maine. They hadn't planned on camping overnight, but brought the extra supplies with them just in case. From what the forest ranger, Bill Hawthorne, had told them, they would be the only ones on the mountain today because not many people go hiking in March. The six of them got their packs on their shoulders and headed up the mountain. Samuel carried Jennifer's whenever she started not feeling good, or when she started to not feel good. It was 12 o'clock when they made it about a quarter of the way up the mountain. The snow was getting deeper because of the altitude, and the air was getting colder the higher up they went. They had thought about turning and going back down the mountain, but they decided they would be fine because they brought extra with them in case they did have to camp out overnight. They also brought a cell phone so they could call their parents and let them know what they were going to do if there had been a change of plans. They decided that it would be best to stop and call their parents to let them know they would probably be camping out overnight on the mountain and would be back home by tomorrow afternoon. After calling their parents, they continued on their way up the mountain. They all had to put their snowshoes on when they had stopped to call their parents because the snow was getting too deep for them to walk in without them. About 100 yards from where they had stopped to call their parents, they came upon a set of tracks. "I thought the ranger said that we were the only ones on the mountain today," asked Vernon. "That is what he said," Samuel replied. They all looked puzzled until Andrew spoke up and said, "These tracks must have been made by the ranger yesterday." They all agreed and continued on. They had a fairly easy time as they were hiking on the trail, but the higher up they got, the harder it was to keep track of where the trail was because there was less trees. It's 4:30 now, guys. We're a little over halfway up the mountain. I think we should stop and camp here for the night so we can still have some trees for shelter against the wind. Then we can start out early in the morning, Samuel suggested. The others agreed and started setting up their camps. Jennifer wasn't feeling good again, so Samuel gathered up some wood and started a fire so she could sit next to it and keep warm while he set up their tent. While he was setting up their tent, Vernon and Andrew came over to help him. When I was getting wood for the fire, I saw more of the tracks that we seen earlier, he said in a low tone to Vernon and Andrew, so the girls wouldn't hear him. Why would there be tracks all the way up here? It took us all day just to climb up this far, and we never noticed anyone following us, Andrew said. I don't know, Samuel exclaimed, but we should be on alert just in case there's someone out here that the ranger didn't know about. The guys finished setting up the tents and joined the girls by the fire. After they had gotten warmed up a bit, Jennifer whispered to Samuel as he held her in his arms, as he held his arms around her from behind. What the hell's that? I have an incoming call. I have no idea who it is, so I don't answer it. Okay, sorry, honey. Let me see where I was here. Can we go in the tent and talk for a few minutes? There's something I need to tell you. Excuse us for a few, guys. Me and Jennifer need to talk about something. Samuel opened the tent door for Jennifer to climb in first. Then he followed behind her and zipped it closed. Samuel sat in front of Jennifer, and she took a hold of his hand. Are you feeling all right? He asked her with growing concern. Jennifer took a deep breath, looked into Samuel's eyes, and said, I'm pregnant, Samuel. Samuel's face froze. An overwhelming feeling of excitement, happiness, and scared to death ran through him all at one time. Samuel, say something, Jennifer said with a worried voice. A sigh of relief and a smile covered Jennifer's face at the same time as a tear rolled down her cheek when Samuel blurted out with a strong voice, I love you. He gave her a hug and a passionate kiss, then said, let's go outside and tell everyone. Jennifer took his hand, and they crawled back out of the tent. They sat back at the fire with their friends, and Samuel put both of his hands up and said, I have an announcement to make. Jennifer just informed me that around Thanksgiving time this year, she'll become a mother and me a father. The friends all came over and gave them a hug and congratulated them. As they were congratulating them, they heard some branches break in the woods. Did you hear that? Vernon asked the group. They all agreed that they heard the noise, and each of the girls held tight to their boyfriends. It was probably just a deer or something like that, Andrew exclaimed. Just then, the cry of a coyote sounded and sent cold chills down everyone's spine. Once they recovered from the chill of the coyote cry, Andrew decided he'd better get some more wood before the fire went out completely. He grabbed a flashlight and took his turn to get the firewood. He didn't want to go too far from the campsite to get it because he didn't know what kind of animals he could run into, but he knew they wouldn't get too close to the fire. He went into the woods about 20 feet, where he found a bunch of dry wood thrown randomly between three trees. He bent over to get an armload of it and felt an odd feeling on his head, like something was dripping on him. He shook his head in case he was just imagining it. Then he felt the drip again. He turned his head to look up, his eyes opened wide when he moved his flashlight on it. He gasped for air, dropped the wood, then let out a big scream. Back at the camp, they all looked at each other. "You girls stay here at the fire," Samuel exclaimed. Samuel and Vernon went to see what Andrew had screamed for. When they reached him, they saw the look of fright on his face. Samuel shook him and asked, Andrew, what's wrong?" Andrew pointed up in the tree. Samuel and Vernon looked up in the tree and saw Ranger Bill Hawthorne hanging upside down, with his stomach ripped out and both of his arms torn off. "Oh my God," Vernon exclaimed. "We need to grab this wood and get back to the fire with the girls," Samuel said. When they bent down to collect the wood, Vernon grabbed one of the ranger's arms, thinking it was a piece of wood. When Andrew shined the light just right, Vernon noticed what it was, dropped everything he was holding, and turned and let his stomach loose. When he regained himself, he noticed that the ranger's gun was still in the hand of the amputated arm. He reached down and pulled it out of the dead hand, then picked up the wood he dropped, and they headed back to the campfire with the girls. Before reaching the girls, Samuel stopped Andrew and Vernon and said, "Let's not say anything to the girls right now about what we've seen. We don't need to upset them, and don't forget that Jennifer is pregnant, and I don't want to lose my baby." They agreed to keep what they saw to themselves, for now. They continued back to the fire with the girls. "What did Andrew scream so loud for?" Holly asked. "He saw a dead raccoon and it scared him," Vernon replied. The three young men all looked at each other and began to wonder what could possibly have killed the ranger in such a manner as that. After all, the ranger was about 6 feet 3 inches tall and weighed at least 275 pounds. Samuel walked over to Jennifer and sat down behind her and placed his hand under her jacket and on her belly as if to hold her and their unborn baby at the same time. She leaned her head back and rested on his shoulder and whispered, "I love you," in his ear. He kissed her on the cheek and whispered, "I love you too," back to her, and then went back to thinking about the ranger again. After about 15 minutes of silence, Andrew got up to put more wood on the fire. When they got up and walked over to Andrew, Whitney got up and walked over to Andrew and whispered, "I need to go to the ladies' room. Will you come with me?" Andrew grabbed the flashlight and let Vernon and Samuel know that he was going to take Whitney to the bathroom. Whitney grabbed Andrew's hand and pulled on him to hurry him more. Andrew led her to a different part of the woods away from where they had found the ranger. Andrew stood about 15 feet away from Whitney while she went to the bathroom. While he was waiting for her to finish, he started moving his flashlight around on the ground. Then he noticed something in the snow while moving his flashlight around. It's the same tracks that they had seen earlier that day. Then Andrew heard a sharp grunt coming from Whitney's direction. He called her name. "Whitney, are you all right?" he asked. No answer came from Whitney. Andrew started walking over to where he left Whitney to use the bathroom. There was no sign of Whitney and no sign that she had moved from that spot. Just then, Andrew was knocked to the ground from something that fell out of the tree he was under. Did I scare you, you big tough man? Whitney asked. Andrew pushed Whitney off him and told her to never do that to him again and started walking back to the campfire. I was only trying to have some fun, she exclaimed. Catch up to me and let's get back to the campfire with the others, Andrew said sharply. There was no reply from Whitney. Andrew turned around, upset, and said, Whitney, I told you not to mess around like that with me. Now get over here. When he moved his flashlight across the snow looking for Whitney, all he saw were prints going away with a blood trail following. He screamed out, Whitney! He ran back to camp and told the others what happened. They had no choice but to tell the other girls what they had found when they went to get the wood. The girls wanted to go home. There's no way we can go home right now, Samuel said. If we leave right now, then we're going to have less of a chance of making it out alive than we would if we wait until daylight. They all agreed they would wait for daylight, then head back down the mountain. Andrew, Vernon, and myself will take turns staying up and keeping the fire going tonight. And you girls can get some rest, Samuel said. Jennifer and Holly laid down, both crying from the loss of Whitney and from the fear that they had for themselves and the guys. Samuel went to Jennifer and embraced her. It's going to be all right, he said. I'm going to protect you and our baby. Jennifer held him tight and kissed him on the lips as a tear fell from her eye. Samuel went back to the fire with Vernon and Andrew. We have the ranger's gun and the flare gun, so we have a defense against this animal that has done this. But that one defense may not be enough, Samuel exclaimed. Then what else are we going to do? Vernon asked. We don't know. We know the animal will not come near the fire. So we're going to build the fire up more to keep it at a distance, Samuel explained. Andrew, come with me and get more wood, and Vernon can stay here with the girls in the fire, Samuel said. We're going back to where we saw the ranger to get the wood because it was dry and it will burn easier and hotter, Samuel explained. When they got there, they looked up at the ranger again. Look on his belt, Andrew said. We could use that knife. Andrew climbed up the branch where the ranger was and took the knife off of the ranger. He then jumped back down, filled his arms with wood, and they headed back to the fire. When they dumped the wood on the ground, Samuel said, Andrew, you take the first watch so that Vernon and me can ease the girls a little and get them to sleep. No problem. I can't sleep right now anyway, Andrew replied. Vernon laid down next to Holly and Samuel. Vernon laid down next to Holly and Samuel laid down next to Jennifer. Once again, he put his hand under her coat and on her belly and whispered in her ear, I'm never going to let anything happen to the two of you. And he gave her a kiss before he fell asleep. A few hours later, Andrew awoke Vernon and had him stand guard so that he could get some sleep. Vernon watched the fire and kept guard for the next 3 hours, then woke up Samuel to keep guard. I need to go to the bathroom before I lay back down, Vernon exclaimed. Take the flashlight with you and the flare gun, replied Samuel. Vernon grabbed the flashlight and the flare gun and went off into the woods to relieve his discomfort. Samuel kept track of the amount of time that he was gone. After 15 minutes, Samuel started getting worried, but knew that he couldn't leave the fire to go look for him. Just then he saw the flashlight about 25 feet away, bouncing to and fro. All of a sudden, Samuel saw the flashlight about 20 feet in the air. All of a sudden, Samuel saw the flashlight fly about 20 feet in the air and fall to the ground with a heavy thud right after it. All Samuel could do was stare. He couldn't scream because he'd wake everyone up and cause a panic, and he couldn't go to where Vernon lay, or he would end up being the next victim. All he could do is sit there and keep the fire going until daylight arrived. Okay, chapter 4. When daylight came, Samuel walked over to this is the book that Mom wanted me to finish. I gotta find the first 2 pages, or first 4 pages. When daylight came, Samuel walked over to look at Vernon before covering him with a blanket and waking the others. He woke Jennifer first and explained to her what had happened to Vernon. He woke Jennifer first and explained to her what happened to Vernon. Must have forgotten, didn't put in the words when he woke him up to keep guard. Didn't put in the word when he. It was a pen. Oh, wait a minute. He woke Jennifer first and explained to her what happened when Vernon woke him up to keep guard. Okay, that's all good. All Jennifer could do was cling on to Samuel, rest her head on his shoulders, and let the tears fall from her face. Jennifer asked Samuel to let her tell Holly. She thought it might be easier for her to hear it from another female. You're probably right, Samuel replied. You tell Holly and I'll wake Andrew up and tell him, Samuel exclaimed. They gave each other a kiss before going off to tell their friends about Vernon. As Samuel was telling Andrew, they heard a loud cry come from Holly that told them that Jennifer had just let her know about Vernon. Samuel and Andrew came out of the tent where Andrew had slept and joined the girls. Holly's face was pale with sadness and fright as Jennifer held her close. Samuel put his hand on Holly's head and tried to comfort her by saying, "We're going to get through this, Holly, but you're going to have to remain strong, okay?" Holly shook her head yes, in a nervous and scared way. They gathered up the things that they need to take back down the mountain with them. They left behind the things that would only weigh them or slow them down. Then they put out the fire and started down the mountain. As they walked into the thicker forest, Sammy began to get an uneasy feeling coming over him, like there were eyes watching them as they walked along. He grabbed Jennifer's hand. I left the D out of there. Put that in there. Well, pen's not working. He grabbed Jennifer's hand and told Holly to grab Jennifer's hand and Andrew's hand. Andrew remained in the back with a flare gun, and Samuel played lead in the front with the ranger's gun. Samuel eased the group along, watching and listening very cautiously. Then a snap of a branch covered the quiet of the air, and cold chills ran down the spines of all 4 individuals. Then they heard another snap of a branch that was closer than the last. Samuel looked ahead and to the right of the trail. He noticed a big hole in the side of the mountain. It looked like a bear's cave. He knew that it wasn't a good idea, but he also knew that if there was a bear in it, they would be sleeping, and they would at least stand a chance better than out in the open like they were now. At the count of 3, Samuel said quietly, "We're all going to run to that cave." They all agreed, and Samuel started the countdown. 1, 2, 3, run, Samuel yelled as he clenched tight onto Jennifer's hand. Andrew looked behind him as he was running and got the first look at the creature that had killed their friends and that was now trying to kill them. Oh shit, he yelled. Run! Samuel and Jennifer made it to the cave and started encouraging Holly and Andrew to run faster. Finally, they made it to the cave. Once they were all inside the cave, Samuel turned on the flashlight just to turn around and find that if he would have taken one more step, he would have fallen a good 150 feet to an underground river. There's a boulder in the way of the entrance to the cave, so whatever that creature is, it couldn't get past that boulder, or we'd all be dead right now, Samuel explained. The only problem now is that he has us trapped in this place with no way out. Andrew replied, still breathing heavily from the hard run through the deep snow. Let's just rest here for a while and catch our breath back and think. Andrew, grab that stick by your foot and poke it out of the front of the cave, Samuel said. Andrew reached down and picked up the stick that was about 6 feet in length and began to move it toward the front of the cave. Wait a minute. Let me get a shirt from the duffel bag to put on the end of the stick, Jennifer said. She placed the shirt on the end of the stick, and Andrew moved toward the opening of the cave. He slowly poked the shirt out of the cave, and nothing happened. Andrew turned toward the other three, shrugged his shoulders, and said, "The creature must have left." As he stood there, feeling confident he was in a safe place, right after saying, "An arm with a long, harsh." Hold on a second. How do you fix this? Right after saying that. Okay. Right after saying that, an arm with long, harsh-looking fingers and long nails reached in the cave just far enough to make a long gash in Andrew's side. The girl screamed and Andrew fell to the ground in pain. The creature's hand reached in again, this time getting his fingernails planted deep into Andrew's foot. Andrew screamed in pain as the creature tried. How the hell did I write that like that? Andrew screamed in pain as the creature tried to drag Andrew to him. Samuel grabbed the gun from the bag. I don't know why the hell I wrote that like that. Ran to the creature's arm. Why the hell did I write that like that? I wrote it as if I was explaining it. Samuel grabbed the gun from the bag, ran to the creature's arm, and shot the gun twice, severing the hand from the creature's arm. The creature pulled its arm back and screeched a high-pitched scream of pain. Samuel reached down and pulled the severed hand out of Andrew's foot and helped him back to a safer distance from the opening. Andrew, still in pain and breathing heavily, looked at Samuel and said, "Guess what I found out?" What? Samuel asked. "I found out that he's still out there," Andrew replied as he looked at the severed hand of the creature, watching the blue neon blood roll out of it. "Yeah," Samuel added, "I noticed that too." "Well, we know that he only has one hand," Samuel said as he picked it up and threw it into the underground river. He walked over to Jennifer to make sure she was all right, as Holly tended to Andrew's foot and the gash in his side. Huh. I just had a thought. See, this is what happens, honey. So I'm reading along, and all of a sudden I get a thought in my head. So let's see if I can keep the thought, and maybe I can move more in the book. Huh. Okay, where was I? As he was holding Jennifer, he noticed something shining in the corner of the cave. Andrew reached for the flashlight and turned it on, pointing it to the corner where he seen this shiny spot. He saw a long, heavy rope and about 4 to 5 gallon buckets of oil. He ran over to the oil and grabbed a can of it and set it in the center of the cave. This is the oil that was used when the cave was dug, Samuel said as he opened up the spout and poured a little of it on the ground inside the cave. He then reached in the duffel bag, took out a small piece of paper, and lit it on fire when he threw it on the area where he had dumped the oil. The fire grew a little bigger and brighter so they could see better and get warmed up inside the cave. They'd be able to think better once they were once they were warmed up and got something in them to eat. Samuel grabbed the 6-foot long stick that Andrew used to poke out of the cave, broke it up, and threw it on the fire and looked for more wood inside the cave, even though he knew there wouldn't be much. He threw what he found on the fire, and he added more oil to get the fire going better. Then he looked in the duffel bag and grabbed a ham sandwich for everyone and 1 bottle of water to share between the 4 of them. He sat next to Jennifer and gave her a kiss as he asked her if she was all right. "I'm fine," she replied. "Just wish I was in a better place with you right now." "Me too," Samuel said. "Me too." After they finished eating their sandwiches, they all sat quietly and relaxed. Samuel's mind was turning, trying to think of a way to get his fiancée, friends, and himself out of the situation. He added more oil to the fire and then suddenly remembered the rope. He looked to the corner of the cave again and saw the rope. Studying the size of the rope, he decided to pick it up and look at the shape it was in. It looked like it was in pretty good shape and was strong enough to hold him. "Jennifer, I'm going to tie this rope to a few of these big sturdy rocks here inside the cave, and lower myself down to the river to see what I can find out about it. Help guide me down there, okay?" Samuel asked her. Even though she wasn't very happy about the idea, she reluctantly said okay. Samuel tied the rope to the most secure places he could find and started lowering himself down to the river after giving Jennifer a kiss and telling her that he loves her. Once he got down to the river, he noticed that the only openings were underwater by about 10 feet. Pulling himself back up to the cave took a long time, and Samuel had a few scary slips on the way back up, but he finally made it back up to the cave. Tired and out of breath, Jennifer had to pull him onto the flat ground. Then she added more oil to the fire to help him warm up faster. Once he was able to talk again, he let her know that he was pulling together a plan to get them out of there. He just needed to do a little more thinking to make it come together. After resting for an hour, Samuel got up and started working on his plan. Grabbing two of the 3 buckets of oil that was left, he began to open them. He began to make 2 trails of oil from the center of the cave back toward the opening that would meet at the opening. Then he dunked the rope into one of the buckets of oil and let it soak in the fibers of the rope. Jennifer kept the fire going inside the cave while Sammy got his plan together, and Holly was taking care of Andrew. How's he doing? Samuel asked Holly. He's doing better now that I have him patched up, Holly replied. Can he move? Samuel asked. Not very well, Holly answered. Samuel thought for a minute. You're going to have to help him move then, because once we leave this cave, you three need to keep running while I light the fire and try to push the creature backwards into the cave. Samuel explained. Okay, Holly replied. Samuel grabbed a branch that he had found in the cave that was about 2 inches around and about 4 feet long. He wrapped the oil-soaked rope around it and lit the rope on fire. Turning toward Jennifer, he handed her the flare gun and gave her a kiss. I'll be right behind you. I promise, he told her. She clenched the gun in her hand as he kissed her lips one more time. I love you, she told him. I love you too, he answered. Samuel picked up one of the buckets of oil that was half full after helping Andrew to his feet. On the count of 3, start running and don't stop, Samuel demanded. 1, 2. Samuel hesitated a little longer to take one more look at Jennifer, then said the final number for them to run. 3. Run, Samuel shouted as he ran behind the other 3 with a bucket of oil. When Samuel got about 20 feet away from the cave, the creature jumped down behind him. With the fired up torch in one hand and the bucket of oil in the other, Samuel turned around. He got his first look at the creature. It stood about 8 feet tall, was green in color, was hairless, and had a cat-like mouth and black, dead eyes. It had a slight bend in its back like someone would have from lack of calcium to their bones. The creature looked at Samuel, then looked past him to see the others running. Forget it, he said to the creature. You're not getting past me. Then he stuck the torch in the snow with the burning end up. Grabbed the bucket of oil and threw it at the creature, dousing the creature with it and leaving a slight trail of oil leading from the creature to Samuel on the ground. Samuel picked his torch back up as the creature looked at him in a stunned way and lit the ground on fire. When the fire took a blaze in a straight line from where Samuel stood to the creature, lighting the creature in a big fiery ball. Arms swinging, the creature kept stumbling backward into the cave, catching one of the buckets on fire and making it explode. The force of the explosion threw the creature to the back of the cave and down to the underground river. Samuel sighed in relief as he fell to his knees, trying to catch his breath. After a few moments, he returned to his feet and walked to the back of the cave to be sure the creature was dead. He stepped up close to the edge and looked at the underground river. There was no sign of life, so he turned and started walking to join the others. Following the tracks in the snow made by the others, he finally caught up to them when they were almost at the ranger station. Feeling the wear on their bodies, they were relieved to reach the station. There was no signal on the radio when they tried calling for help because of the storm that was coming in. They were out of water and were thirsty from the extensive climb back down the mountain. Samuel and Jennifer decided to walk down to the river to get some water for the 4 of them before it got too dark to see, and left Holly there to rebandage Andrew's wound. Could you turn the light on for me on your way out? Holly asked. Sure thing, Jennifer answered. Samuel grabbed the canteens and a couple of gallon jugs and walked out the door with Jennifer behind him, turning the light on for Holly and Andrew, and grabbed the flashlight on her way out. They made their way down to the river, which was about 100 yards away. relieved to be at the bottom of the mountain. Once they reached the river, they began filling up the containers with water. Jennifer had to move some rocks because she was in a shallow part. Reaching into the river, she reached down to pull out a rock, and when she lifted it up out of the water, she stepped backward and screamed as she fell. Samuel ran over to her to see what was wrong. Jennifer had picked up the severed hand of the creatures from out of the water, thinking it was a rock. Samuel put his arms around her. She held them tight, freaked out and scared from the creature's severed hand. "It's all right," Samuel told her. All she could do was cry as she held on to him tight, not wanting to let go. Once she was calmed back down, Samuel finished filling the jugs, and the two of them headed back to the station. As they opened the door to the station, they found Holly on the radio. She had finally been able to reach someone. "We're at the ranger station at the foot of Mount Katahdin. We need help," she urged. "We'll send someone out as soon as the storm lets up. All the roads to there have been closed," the man explained as the static started getting heavier and the radio once again lost its signal. "Hello? Hello?" Holly yelled urgently, but there was no answer from the other end as she set the radio mic down on the desk and hung her head. Samuel looked over at Andrew, noticing that Holly had finished fixing him up in new bandages. He set the containers of water down on the counter and poured Andrew, Holly, and Jennifer a cup of water, then looked through the cabinets in the ranger station. He had noticed the coffee pot on the counter, so figured there must be some coffee in one of them cabinets. He finally located the coffee, fixed the pot, and made them all a cup. Nobody said a word. Samuel started thinking about his friends, Vernon and Whitney, wishing they were still there with them, and wondering why all this had to happen to them. Where did that creature come from? He asked himself without speaking. Jennifer had finished her coffee and fallen asleep with her head resting in Samuel's lap. He looked over at Andrew and Holly and noticed that they had fallen asleep as well. Setting his coffee down, he ran his hand over Jennifer's head. Stroking her hair, all he could think was, "Thank God I didn't lose you." He laid his head back against the wall where he sat on the floor and closed his eyes, listening to the music on the radio playing low in the quiet of the night. Samuel slowly faded off to sleep. He slept lightly. He slept lightly. That didn't make sense. He slept lightly. Thoughts that someone may try to contact them on the radio. Left out a couple words there. He only slept a few hours because of so much of the day's events going through his mind. He gently lifted Jennifer's head and slid a backpack filled with clothes under her, then got up to fix him another cup of coffee. He opened up the door to see how much snow had accumulated. "Wow," he said to himself. "There's about 30 inches of snow that has already fallen, and it's still..." No, I can't see it. "And it's still coming down heavy." He grabbed the shovel so he could shovel a path in front of the door. Samuel returned inside after shoveling and began looking through the storage room now that there was some light coming through the window. He couldn't look through it during the night because the light in the room was out and he didn't want to waste the battery power on the flashlight in case they needed it again. There was a whole storage room full of supplies. There was food and blankets, even extra batteries if they needed them. Hanging on the wall in the back corner was a gun cabinet with with a glass front for the door, but there wasn't much ammunition. In the closet, there wasn't much ammunition in the closet beside the cabinet. Sammy grabbed some food, a couple of cots, and some blankets, and brought them into the main room of the station. He set the cots up and helped Andrew into one of them so he could rest easier then set up the other cot for Holly because Jennifer was awake and began helping Samuel. They opened some of the food so they could get some food in their stomachs. It's not what I would normally want for breakfast, but I guess it will have to do for this morning, Samuel said. You mean to tell me I'm going to have to make you bacon and eggs in the mornings? Jennifer asked. Only unless you want me to die from my own cooking, Samuel replied. No, you can stay out of the kitchen and let me handle the cooking, I guess, Jennifer answered. Samuel smiled, thanking her for relieving him from the cooking chores. After they all finished eating, Samuel tried contacting someone on the radio again, while Jennifer cleaned up the mess from eating and Holly put new bandages on Andrew. He looked over at Holly and Andrew as they were talking and thought again about their friends Vernon and Whitnick. He thought of the way Andrew and Holly must be hurting inside from losing their girlfriend and boyfriend. Then he moved his eyes to Jennifer and thanked God that he hadn't lost her. While these thoughts about Jennifer were crawling through his mind, a voice came over the radio. Hello, Samuel answered. Hello, the voice asked again. We need help at the ranger station on Mount Katahdin, Samuel explained. It's going to be another day before the roads are all clear to that area. Just stay put, and we'll be there first thing in the morning, the voice answered. But we have an injured man here, he replied. Hello, are you there? Samuel asked. The signal was gone again. All they could do was wait. At least we have enough food to last us till tomorrow, Jennifer said as she walked over and hugged Samuel. If we're going to have to stay here for another day, then I'm going to have to go to the river to get more water to see us through, Samuel said as he flipped his coat around him and slid his arms in the sleeves. Jennifer gave him a hug and a kiss. Hurry back, she said softly. I will, he replied as he put his snowshoes on and walked out the door. Chapter 5. Samuel struggled to walk. You say, better sit back and read this part. Can't see it. Samuel struggled to walk on the snow because of the brisk wind and thick falling snow. Thank God we have the ranger station for shelter right now. A person could freeze to death out here, he said out loud to himself. The river was only about 100 yards away, but it seemed more like 5 miles with the wind blowing the way it was. It made Samuel's nose so cold that he felt it might break if he touched it. He looked at his watch when he reached the small river. 3:17 p.m., he said. I didn't look to see what time it was when I left, but it must have taken me about 10 minutes to walk from the cabin to here, Samuel said out loud. Samuel grabbed the containers and began filling them. The cold water made his fingers feel frozen, running over them as he held the containers under the water to fill them up. When he finished filling them all, when he finished filling them all, he tied them around his neck and turned to head back toward the ranger station. He looked to his left just enough to catch an indentation in the fresh falling snow. Oh my God, he said to himself. They were the footprints of the creature making their way towards Ranger Station. Samuel dropped the containers of water and began to run to the Ranger Station. His, his legs his legs felt heavy, and he felt like he wanted to collapse in the snow. He forced his way through the brutal wind and cold and plowed through the door of the station. Quickly getting off the snowshoes, he began giving orders to Jennifer and Holly. "What's wrong?" Jennifer asked. When he looked in when he looked in her eyes, huh, or when he looked her in the eyes, she knew, and so did Andrew and Holly. When I went down to the rope river, when I went down on the rope to the river, when we were in the cave, I seen a small hole in the wall beneath the water, but I didn't think it was big enough for the creature to get through. When he fell to the river from the cave, I caught him on fire. He must have survived it. I seen his footprints in the fresh fallen snow down by the river," Samuel explained. They all felt their hearts drop and suddenly felt sick to their stomachs. "We need to get ready for him," Samuel said. Andrew started groaning as he tried to get up, in pain from his wounds and struggling. Jesus, I can't even friggin' talk. "Stay there, Andrew. You're only going to make things worse if you try moving," Holly demanded. "Holly, get Andrew situated so that he can hold the gun to the window and can look out. Jane, go to the storage room and get all the guns from the cabinet." "I'll get the ammunition," Samuel said as he locked the front door. They headed for the storage room. "It's locked," Jennifer shouted. Samuel grabbed Bar from the closet and was getting the ammunition from. The hell? Oh, from the closet he was getting the ammunition from. "Step back," he said as he smashed the glass so Jennifer could get the guns. They returned to the main room with all the guns and some ammunition. "Jennifer, take Holly with you and go back in the storage room and grab 2 cases of the canned food and the wire I saw in the closet where I got the ammunition from," Samuel said. "Bring them out here and empty them all." The girls did as he instructed while Samuel and Andrew loaded the 8 guns and finished getting Andrew set up by the window. "Once you finish emptying all the cans, poke a hole in each can and run about 2 feet of wire through 4 cans. Do that about 8 times," Samuel explained. While the girls were getting the cans prepared, Andrew was watching out the window with a rifle in hand and ready to fire at the sight of the creature. Samuel went back into the storage room to look for candles and to get 3 cans of gas he seen earlier and whatever oil he could find, which turned out to be only 2 quarts, but it would have to do. He returned to the main room with candles and fuel in each arm. Putting on his coat, he stopped and looked at Jennifer. She looked back and gave him the look of to say, "Please don't go out there," but she held it back because she knew he was only doing what he had to do. He put on his hat, gloves, and snowshoes and grabbed. He put on his hat, gloves, and snowshoes. Oh, then tied together the cans and wire and turned to open the door. Jennifer ran over. Jennifer ran over and looked at him. "Be careful and come back to me," she said. "I will," he replied. then kissed her, sighed, and went out the door, and she locked it behind him. Samuel stood there in front of the door and looked around, then looked at his watch. It's 4:10 right now, and it gets dark at about 5:30. That's probably when he's going to come, is after dark, he said to himself. He climbed the snowbank in front of the door and headed to a tree in front of the building. Tied the wire around it, then led the wire to the next tree and continued until he had the wire surrounding the building. He then tied the string of empty cans to the wire in 8 different places. He didn't have to throw snow over them to hide them because it was snowing so hard still that the cans would be hidden in a matter of 15 minutes. Once the wire was run and cans were set in place, Samuel chopped down a couple of medium-sized trees in the back of the ranger station. He poured the 2 quarts of oil over the trees, went to the edge of the woods, and chopped down a fir tree. He could use the branches from the fir tree to get the fire going hot, and it would also light up around the station more so he could see better. After covering both of the chopped down trees with the fir branches, it was almost dark. He made a path with the shovel through the snow to go from the front door to the area of the fire. He found a small piece of paper in his back pocket, lit it on fire, placed it on one of the fir branches, filled an empty can with gas, and threw it on the small fire. When the fuel reached the fire, it lit up the night with a boom. The fir branches caught on fire fast and burned hot, but Samuel knew that would only last a short amount of time. With the fire burning hot and bright for the moment, Samuel knew this was the best time to go check on Jennifer, Holly, and Andrew, and also get his 2 guns and extra ammunition. When he walked in the door, all 3 of them quickly turned their guns toward him until they realized who it was. Jennifer ran up to him and gave him a hug and a kiss. He held her tight for a moment. "I have to get my guns and ammo," he said, then gave her a kiss, told her he loved her, and headed back out the door. Samuel was back to the fire by the time it had calmed down. He wiped the snow off of an old metal chair that was against the building and sat down, watched the fire, and waited, thinking often about the night before and trying to prepare himself for the nightmare that lay ahead. But he knew that nothing could prepare him for it. The creature was something that had no mercy. That had no mercy and would take a life at the first possible chance he could, and he would do it in a gruesome, despicable way. Chapter 6. Samuel got up from his chair to move the wood around on the fire so it would burn better. He watched the sparks float into the sky as he poked at the hot wood. He became alert quickly when he heard the sound of a set of cans clang together. Grabbing the small food can he had filled with gas, he quickly threw it on the fire. It boomed as the gas touched the fire and lit up the night. Samuel looked around quickly to the area of the rattling cans. There was nothing there that he could see. He filled the small can up with gas again, threw it on the fire, and watched it explode. He looked again in the area of the rattling cans. He could see it. The creature was sloped behind a set of bushes with his cat-reflecting eyes showing against the fire. Sammy grabbed his rifle, aimed and fired, and shot in the direction of the bushes. He almost dropped his gun from the high-pitched screeching sound the creature made from the bullet ripping through him. Sammy lifted his rifle and fired again, but got nothing. "Maybe I killed him," he said to himself. Then he heard cans rattle in another direction. He grabbed a can of gas and quickly threw it on the fire. The gas exploded when it reached the fire. Samuel could see the creature excuse me, honey. Samuel could see the creature again, so he lifted the rifle quickly again and let off another round. He could tell he missed that time because he didn't take his time to aim. Samuel stood quietly, listening for any noises the creature might make. He couldn't hear anything. He thought maybe the creature left from getting hurt from the shot that Samuel had put through him. Out of nowhere, the creature approached, lunging towards Samuel above the fire. Samuel lifted his gun to fire at the creature, but before he knew it, the creature had Samuel off his feet, holding him by the throat. He threw Samuel 20 feet. When Samuel landed in the deep snow, he quickly got to his feet, pointing his rifle in all different directions. There was no sign of the creature. Samuel made his way back to the fire and threw more gas on it. A large flame lit up the night, but Samuel could see no sign of the creature. Then he looked down and seen the last footprints of the creatures. He's on the roof, he thought to himself. Samuel slowly turned around and looked up. There it stood on the roof of the ranger station. It stared at Samuel with a look of pure hatred. Slowly lifting his rifle, he began to take sight of the creature. Then, without expecting it, the creature leaped from the roof towards Samuel, and Samuel let off a shot. The bullet pierced through the creature's skin, making the creature let out a loud, high-pitched screeching noise as he kept falling towards Samuel. As the creature landed, his only good hand had managed to find Samuel's face, leaving a bloody slash on his cheek in front of his left ear. Then the creature leaped again out of sight. Samuel put his hand up to his cheek and brought it back down to observe the amount of blood. He quickly grasped both hands on his rifle again and reloaded it. Looking around in expectance, holding his rifle tight in his hand, he moved from the left of the building to the right of the building. There was no sign of the creature. I must have hit him good with that last shot I fired, speaking to himself. Samuel made his way to the front door to check the others. Blood was traveling down his cheek to his neck from the creature's slash he gave Samuel when he jumped off the roof of the ranger station. Jennifer grabbed him and held him tight after unlocking the door to let him in. She looked at his cheek in horror. "You're bleeding. You're bleeding badly, Samuel," Jennifer said. "Sit down over here so I can take care of it." "How's Andrew holding up?" Samuel asked quietly as he looked in Andrew's direction, noticing Holly had changed his bandages again. "He's doing all right," Jennifer replied as she began cleaning Samuel's wound. "Is the creature dead?" she asked. "No, but I got a good shot on it. But I got a good shot on it though, and hurt it really bad," Samuel said. "I'm going to have to go back out there again. I don't think the creature will be coming back for a little while, though, so I wouldn't mind. So I wouldn't mind having something hot to drink while I'm in here," he implied to Jennifer after she was done dressing his wound. She gave him a kiss and fetched him some coffee. He sipped it slowly as not to burn his tongue. Samuel looked at the clock and read 11:35. He knew the creature would be back again tonight. He just wasn't sure how long it would take before it would return. He walked to the radio and tried to contact someone, someone, anyone once again, but all he got was silence because of the storm. Samuel sat down on the floor, back against the wall to rest, careful not to fall asleep, as Jennifer laid her head in his lap. He laid the gun next to him and began stroking her hair. In a low voice, he promised her, "I'll never let anything happen to you." "I'll never let anything happen to you or our baby," he assured her, not really meaning for her to hear him. "I know you won't," she replied as she set her hand on his leg just to feel a part of him for the security. The night slowly crept by as Samuel noticed himself starting to doze off. He caught himself just in time to wake himself back up. He carefully lifted Jennifer's head and put his duffel bag full of clothes beneath her head as he got to his feet. Looking at the clock, he noticed it read 3:22. Sammy looked out the window, positive the fire had gone out by now, or at least was down to just hot coals. He decided against going back outside until morning light approached in fear of the creature awaiting him in the dark. "I was positive the creature would return tonight before daylight," Samuel said to himself. "I must have really gotten a good shot on him. If he hasn't come back before daylight, then I'll be able to go outside and look to see the amount of blood the creature lost to the ground," he muttered. He muttered to himself. Sammy went to the radio again. Tried to reach someone, but no luck. Andrew, Holly, and Jennifer were all asleep. Sammy went into the large storage room to see what he could find to eat. Reaching around a jar of pickles, he discovered 4 boxes of donuts. He made his way to the main room with the donuts and made himself another cup of coffee. Jennifer and Holly were both becoming restless. Sammy tried to stay as quiet as possible so he wouldn't wake them, but with the fear of the creature in their minds, it was of no good to try being quiet because they both woke up within a matter of minutes of him making his coffee. Jennifer got up from the floor, wiping the sleep from her eyes and yawning. She found her way to Samuel and sat on his lap, resting her head on his shoulder. He kissed her forehead and placed his hand on her belly as to touch their baby inside her. "Would you like me to make some eggs for you?" she asked as she yawned again. "No, these donuts have filled me up. But I think you, Holly, and Andrew should have something to eat, though. There's no telling when the creature will come back again," Samuel explained. I'm going to go back outside when it becomes light out. I want to see how much blood the creature lost when I shot him. It should be light out pretty soon." Samuel looked at the clock as Jennifer moved to her feet toward the stove. It was 4:30. "Should be light out soon." Samuel thought to himself as he took another sip of his coffee. Jennifer reached in the refrigerator and got out the eggs and butter and set it next to the stove. Then she moved in front of the little window above the sink and reached up in the cabinet to retrieve a frying pan. After grabbing the frying pan in her hand, she began to bring it down when she moved her eyes to the window in front of her. She screamed and dropped the pan as she backed up, almost tripping over the small carpet that lay on the floor behind her. Sammy jumped to his feet and looked at Jennifer as she pointed at the window, staring into the horror-filled cat-like eyes of the creature looking in the window. Sammy grabbed his gun, aimed, and squeezed the trigger. By the time the shot fired, the creature had gone. Sammy rushed over to Jennifer to see if she was all right. She threw her arms around his neck and began crying. Andrew had awakened in the commotion and reached for his gun to be prepared. He moved his eyes towards Samuel and Jennifer to see if she was all right. "Is she all right, Samuel?" Andrew asked. "She's fine," he replied. "How are you feeling?" Samuel asked. "I've had better days, but I'm still alive," Andrew replied. "Yeah, your nurse seems to be taking pretty good care of you," Samuel replied. Andrew looked at Holly and watched a small grin appear on her face. "Yeah, she's definitely good at taking care of someone. Vernon always knew how to pick the good ones," he replied in a flirting tone. Samuel helped Jennifer to her feet. As she stood up, as she stared at what the hell did that read? As she stood up, the window in front of Andrew smashed with the arm of the creature reaching inside, trying to grab Andrew, but just short of reaching. Jennifer and Holly both threw their hands to their mouths and screamed. Andrew turned his head to see the creature's long bony fingers trying to grab him, but not quite able to reach. There was no way Andrew could move without the creature being able to grab him. Samuel quickly grabbed the scorching hot pot of coffee on the counter next to Andrew and threw it on the creature's arms. Once again, the creature let out a loud, high-pitched scream, withdrew his arm from inside, and retreated once again. Andrew looked at the coffee pot in Samuel's hand and cursed. "Damn. What? Are you all right?" Samuel asked. "Yeah, I'm fine. I was just hoping to have a cup of that coffee before you threw it out," Andrew replied. Samuel gave a little grin. "Sorry, I'll make another pot to replace that one." Samuel retrieved some plastic and a staple gun from the storage room to put over the two broken windows while Jennifer made another pot of coffee and eggs. Daylight was approaching, and Samuel was anxious to get outside and look at the amount of damage he had done to the creature the night before. As Samuel rounded the corner of the back of the building, he saw a large line of blue neon blood that spread from the roof to where the creature had vanished into the woods. Samuel knew he had shot the creature, but didn't think it would be that bad because of it returning this morning. Grabbing a stick that had not burned in the fire, Samuel started poking through the black coals to see if there were any hot coals left, but found none. Samuel backed away from the pile of the black coals and stopped suddenly to listen. He lifted his winter hat above his ears to listen closer. He could hear the engine of a snowmobile running, but it sounded like it was idling. He ran inside the station to let the others know what he heard. "It sounds like it's just idling, so I'm not going to go out and see if I can find where it is," Samuel exclaimed as he got on his snowshoes and grabbed his gun. So I'm going out and see if I can find out where it is," Samuel exclaimed as he got on his snowshoes and grabbed his gun, giving Jennifer a kiss on the lips before going out the door. Samuel started toward the sound of the snowmobile engine, his gun gripped tightly in his hand, and his eyes moving from left to right as he walked cautiously across the newly fallen snow, staying alert and ready if the creature should jump out at any given moment. The sound of the snowmobile engine grew closer and closer. Samuel could now see the snowmobile as he walked around the corner about 200 feet from him, but he couldn't see the rider. As he got close to the snowmobile, he could see an arm on the ground behind the snowmobile. He ran toward it, thinking maybe the guy had been smacked in the face by one of the low-hanging branches and had been knocked off. He could feel himself begin to sweat under his winter jacket and heavy pants from running. When he approached the snowmobile and was able to see the man, Samuel bent over and gave up the donuts and coffee he had earlier that morning. He lifted his hands back from his knees and looked at the man's face. It showed his eyes wide open with a look of terror and shock in them, with his mouth opened in astonishment. His body lay lifeless with his arms to the side and his stomach missing and showing only his spine and back muscles. And Samuel looked next to the body of the dead man and noticed the familiar footprints in the snow that ended the man's life. Samuel realized then that the creature could possibly be watching him right now. He jumped on the snowmobile and headed back to the ranger station with it. When he got back, Jennifer was waiting for him with the door open. "The creature got the man that had the snowmobile," Samuel said. "I have a feeling that it's not going to let anyone in to find us and not going to let us out. We're going to have to make our stand with it right here," he exclaimed. Jennifer and Holly both looked at Samuel with worried and frightened expressions on their faces. "We can do it," Jennifer said. "We have to do it." Chapter 7. Samuel did everything he could to try and contact someone for help, but the radio wouldn't come in on the cell phone, and the cell phone could no longer get reception. When they were higher on the mountain, excuse me. When they were higher on the mountain, they could get a signal, but from the ranger station, they couldn't. The phone at the ranger station was no longer working either because of the weather. Samuel was surprised that they still had power. It wasn't snowing as hard now as it had been, but it was still coming down steady. The man on the snowmobile had some matches, a lighter, 2 quarts of oil, a hatchet, and a small chainsaw on the snowmobile. He must have been the man that groomed the trails, Samuel thought to himself while he was standing outside going over the snowmobile. Samuel went back inside the station and let Jennifer, Holly, and Andrew know what he had found. I'm going to go out and get the wood that I'm going to need for the fire outside. I need to start getting these things ready now for when the creature comes back. I need you to come with me, Holly, and be my eyes to watch out for the creature while I'm cutting the wood," Samuel said. "I'll come with you," Jennifer insisted. "No," Samuel stated. "You're carrying our baby. I want you to stay here." "We're not going far. We're just the perimeter of the station. The closer we stay to each other, the safer we'll all be," Samuel said as he slid on his gloves and gave Jennifer a kiss. Holly was finishing putting on her boots, then her jacket, hat, and finally her gloves. Then she was ready to go out the door. Andrew grabbed his gun and kept hold of it. Keep the gun close to you, Jennifer. Don't get any more than 5 feet from it, Samuel told her with a worried voice, and then kissed her and headed out the door. Samuel and Holly got on the snowmobile and started it up. He turned the skis to the left and went about 65 feet until he came to the woods line. He turned off the snowmobile and grabbed the chainsaw. He paused, looked around, looked at Holly, and took a big sigh and started the chainsaw. Holly could see the worry in his eyes of leaving Jennifer at the station. She began looking around as Samuel started cutting the trees down, keeping her attention as focused as she could at being his eyes. It didn't take long at all for Samuel to have 10 trees cut down, limbed out, and cut into 4-foot lengths. He turned the chainsaw off and retrieved the rope from the sled. He tied it onto the back of the sled, then piled the branches in separate piles, tied the rope to the piles, and hauled them over by the station. Then he went back and forth, hauling the 4-foot wood to the station. By the time all that was done, it was almost 10 o'clock. Samuel and Holly decided to take a break. Jennifer had some fresh coffee ready and waiting for them when they came inside. Samuel walked over by Andrew to see how he was doing. "I'm sorry I'm not much help right now, Samuel," Andrew said apologetically. "Don't worry about it. You're helping out a lot by being in here, keeping hold of that gun, and helping to protect Jennifer and our baby," Samuel stated. "Besides, the only thing I need out there are an extra pair of eyes, and Holly's doing that job just fine. I'm surprised the creature hasn't come back yet," Andrew said. "I must have really gotten a good shot on him last night for it to stay away this long. It's probably trying to get itself healed up some and get some energy back before it comes back again. That will at least give me some time to get prepared for it," Samuel said. Samuel finished his coffee, and him and Holly headed back outside to cut more trees. He would cut 10 trees at a time, delimb them, cut them into 4-foot lengths, and haul them over near the station. By 2 o'clock, he was finished cutting all the trees he needed to cut and had them stacked in different piles so he would have easy access to them when he needed them. Jennifer had made some bologna sandwiches for everyone when Samuel and Holly came back in to eat lunch. Then they went right back outside to continue getting prepared. They had no idea when the creature would be back, so every moment they could use to get prepared for it was spent doing just that. Samuel had cut slots in some of the stumps where he had cut the trees down, then filled 8 of them with 10 lanterns he found in the storage room and placed them in the slots he made in the stumps. He left the other 2 lanterns at the station just in case they lost power. He cut slots in 4 other stumps and poured some oil and gas in them and let them soak in. He would light them all right before it turned dark, and they would be able to see more at night. Samuel had found 2 rakes, a pick, and a poker for a stove in the storage room. He brought those out back of the station. House and placed them leaning against the wall close to where he would have the fire. It's just faded out some, quite a bit. He still had some of the cans in place from the night before, so those that were still in place would help alert them if the creature came from the direction of them. It was now getting close to dark, so Samuel decided to light all the lanterns and the 4 stumps that he had soaked with oil and gas. Then he walked over and lit one of the piles of brush from the trees he had cut and threw 5 or 6 4-foot logs on top of them. Went inside to get prepared for the on top of them. Then went inside to get prepared for the night. He had left the cans of gas outside by the fire because he knew that's where he would need them. When Samuel was looking in one of the closets to see what he could find that would be of use to them, he noticed a hole in the plywood floor, just big enough for a finger to fit in it. He wondered if maybe this was a trap door to a basement. He finished taking the rest of the things out of the closet to clear the floor. He put his finger in the hole and pulled up on the plywood. It lifted up in a 2 foot by 2 foot in a 2 foot by 2 foot piece. Samuel took it out of the closet and placed it on the floor. He looked for a switch for a light but found none. So he lit a lantern and looked into the hole. There was a ladder leading down into a basement that looked to be a full-size basement. He climbed onto the ladder and went into the basement. Looking around, he found the freezer full of food in one corner, a pile of 2x6s in another corner, and a blanket and a safety net in another corner. Samuel stood there and thought for a few minutes. He looked over at the pile of 2x6s around to the window that was at the back of part of the building that he didn't notice from the outside because of the snow covering it. Samuel climbed back up the ladder and informed the others of his findings and told them his idea. They needed a way to trap the creature in case they ran out of bullets, which was quite possible. Seems how there wasn't much when they got to the station. He got on his coat, gloves, and hat, and Holly came with him for an extra pair of eyes. He grabbed his gun as they headed out the door, then went out back and fed a few more 4-foot logs to the fire. Then he grabbed the shovel he had found earlier and began shoveling out where the window was to the basement. After finding the window, he broke the glass and threw one end of a rope into the basement and left the other end outside. Then he went back inside with Holly, following close behind him. He grabbed the chainsaw and lantern after removing his coat, hat, and gloves, and set them by the entrance to the basement. After searching in the storage room and finding 4 nails, he grabbed the hammer and nailed them into the middle of the floor in the main room in a square pattern. Then he climbed down to the basement ladder. Then he climbed down the basement ladder with a chainsaw and a lantern, almost missing a step on the way, and looked over the 2x6s that lay piled in one corner. After removing the first 6 that were laying on the top, he finally found one full-length 2x6 that was in good condition. Then he found another good one about 6 foot long. He started the chainsaw and cut 2 feet off of the 6-footer to make it easier to handle, then stood them both up to make a T. onto the floor where he had nailed the 4 nails in a square pattern above. He grabbed the end of the rope that he had fed into the basement window and tied it to the bottom of the standing 2x6 and proceeded up the ladder with the chainsaw and lantern. Once he got back upstairs, he noticed Holly changing Andrew's bandages again, and Jennifer was keeping watch out of the window. Looking at Andrew got him thinking. He was going to have to move Andrew to a different spot closer to the back room to make it easier for him to get out through the hole he had cut in the wall. That was going to leave one person not being able to shoot at the creature though. I'll deal with that when the time comes, Samuel thought to himself. He continued to start the chainsaw to cut the square in the floor, leaving just a half-inch of wood still attached on the floor joist. He asked Jennifer to place a carpet over the square that he had just cut in the floor so the creature wouldn't see it. Then he went to the back room and cut a hole in the back wall for the 4 of them to escape through once they had the creature trapped. Samuel turned the chainsaw off after cutting the hole in the wall and went into the main room. He checked the clock and it read 8:10 p.m. The creature could come out at any time, so I'm going to go outside and light the other piles on fire, Samuel said as he started getting his coat on. But before he reached the doorknob, he heard a thump on the roof. Samuel looked up at Jennifer. "It's here," he said. Oh. Chapter 8. Still with me, honey? Okay. Jennifer looked at Samuel, her eyes full of fright. Samuel reached for the rifle, aimed at the ceiling, and started firing one shot after another. Andrew grabbed his gun and started shooting at the ceiling also. After 2 times of reloading, they stopped and listened. They couldn't hear anything. They waited a few minutes, still nothing. Get Andrew positioned over there near the back so it'll make it easier to get him out when we get the creature trapped, Samuel demanded. After you do that, Holly, go down in the basement and get that safety net in the corner and bring it up here. I'm going outside to stop the other fires. We've got to lead the creature around to the front door, Samuel stated. The girls began getting Andrew moved toward the back as Samuel went out the front door and cautiously around to the back to light the other fires. He looked up as he lit the last fire and caught notice of the creature's cat-like eyes reflecting in the bushes from the light of the fire. Samuel's heart began to race as he slowly backed away from the fire and then raced to the front door. Holly had just come back up the basement ladder with the net hanging over her shoulders. Samuel moved everyone toward the back room. They sat there and waited for what seemed to be hours, staring at the front door. Where the hell are you, son of a bitch?" Samuel asked out loud to the creature. Samuel looked at the front door and thought, out of habit, I closed the front door and should have left it open. Samuel started to move. "Where are you going?" Jennifer asked in a worried voice. "I have to go open the front door so the creature can come in. I didn't think to leave it open when I ran back in here from lighting the fires," Samuel replied. "Be careful, please, Samuel," Jennifer pleaded. "I will," he said, and gave her a kiss. Samuel once again began moving slowly toward the door. His eyes focused solidly on the doorknob as he slowly reached for it. His palms beginning to sweat, and a bead of sweat starting to run down his forehead. He clenched the doorknob in his hand and began to turn it and to slowly open the door. He opened the door wide enough so he could place his body in the doorway and slowly move outside to try to find the location of the creature. Samuel turned around and looked at Jennifer in a way of disappointment when he couldn't see the creature. He began to make his way back to the others when the creature came flying through the window, knocking Samuel to the ground and the gun out of his hand. "Samuel!" Jennifer screamed in horror. Samuel turned his body and began crawling back towards the rifle. His flask he had retrieved from the creature the previous night had started bleeding again and was running down his face. The creature was inches toward him. The creature was inches toward him on all fours slowly. I guess it was inching toward him on all fours slowly, like he was teasing Samuel, saying, "I've got you now." Samuel had to think very quickly if he was going to survive this encounter. Samuel placed his feet just right and jumped toward his rifle, quickly grabbing it in his hands and turning back to face the creature just in time to fire a shot while the creature was in the air. The bullet hit the creature, taking a big chunk out of its shoulder of its bad arm. The creature screeched one of his high-pitched screams of pain and fell to the floor. Samuel pulled the trigger again, but the gun was out of ammunition. "I have to get it to follow me to the center of the floor," Samuel thought to himself. Samuel got to his feet to run past the creature, tripping as the creature reached out and grabbed Samuel's leg with his good arm. Samuel used the other leg to kick the creature's face continuously until the creature let go of his leg. Once he was free, he scrambled to the other side of the carpet where he had cut a square in the floor. "Get Andrew outside right now," he demanded, Holly and Jennifer. After he's out there, you two go out, grab the rope that's coming out of the basement window. When I tell you to, pull on it hard," Samuel explained. "Go now," he yelled. The girls did as he said, struggling to get Andrew out. They finally reached the rope outside that was hanging out the basement window, grabbed it, and waited for Samuel's command. Inside the station, Samuel watched as the creature struggled to its feet, noticing that the creature's arm was dangling from its socket, nearly ready to fall off. Samuel almost felt sorry for the thing for being in such terrible shape until he remembered how he killed his friends, Vernon and Whitney, with no mercy. Then the feeling of complete hatred overcame Samuel, and he no longer felt any pity for the creature's pain. The creature looked at Samuel with deadly cat eyes, wanting badly to tear apart his insides like he had done to so many others in the last couple of days. He began walking towards Samuel. Samuel had nothing in his hands to defend himself, but he kept shouting to the creature, "Come on, come and get me." He coaxed the creature as he kept backing up more and more. The creature walked towards Samuel as far as the carpet, then stopped, looked down, and reached and moved the carpet, exposing where Samuel had cut. Samuel's heart dropped when the creature realized the trap, but he tried to coax it anyway. "Come on," Samuel shouted. The creature took one big step over the trap, and Samuel became an easy prey. "Pull on the rope," Samuel quickly pleaded. I only have one chance as he reached to the floor and grabbed the barrel of the empty shotgun. The creature kept coming towards Samuel. When it got close enough, Samuel grasped the barrel of the gun, the barrel of the shotgun, with both hands, like a baseball bat, and swung with all his strength until he connected with the creature's head. Hold on. One of the paper's bent. Knocking the creature to the floor where Samuel had cut the square. The impact of the creature hitting the floor made the 2x6s break through completely, and the creature went crashing to the concrete floor in the basement. Samuel quickly grabbed the net and threw it on top of the creature. The creature lay there struggling furiously to get out of the net that was holding it down. Samuel quickly ran outside and got the gas can. He ran back inside and began dumping gasoline all over the inside of the station house, and then the basement on the creature. Samuel looked down at the creature struggling in the net, and as he lit a match, the creature looked up at him. "Burn in hell, you son of a bitch," Samuel said as he dropped the match on the creature, watching the creature catch fire. Samuel turned and walked out the back to the others, then lit another match. He threw it in the line of gas he had poured in the station house, just in time to see the creature jump out of the hole and catch on fire again. The flames spread quickly, and they all four listened to the screeches and screams of the burning creature. Jennifer held on tight to Samuel. "Thank God it's over," she said as she rested her head on him, watching the flames. They spent the rest of the night watching the fire from the station house burn. "Come on, Samuel and Jennifer." Come dawn, Samuel and Jennifer drove the snowmobile into town to get the authorities. They had a big plow truck plow the road to the ranger station so an ambulance and fire trucks could get in. The paramedics loaded Andrew into the back of the ambulance as the cops drove Samuel, Jennifer, and Holly to the police station. To fill out a report as to what happened. In the meantime, the firefighters were back at the ranger station putting out the remaining fire and cleaning up the basement to try to find the remains of the creature. Tony was the fire chief and standing by the burning foundation. He was looking around the basement and noticed the freezer in the corner. Tony shouted to Kevin, who was in the basement, helping to find the creature's remains. "Kevin, go open that freezer and check what's inside of it." Kevin stumbled over the burned wood and metal until he made his way to the freezer. As he began to open up the freezer, he could smell a foul smell. He stopped for a moment to catch his breath from the foul smell, then proceeded to open the door to the freezer. His eyes grew wide and his flesh quickly paled at the sight. He found the creature curled up in the freezer, not knowing if it was dead or alive because its eyes were closed. Kevin began to reach his hand forward to push on the creature. That's as far as I got, honey.
Why did you write about high schoolers having sex?
I don't know. It was just what I wrote at the time. It was just a thought in my head at the time, I guess. I don't know. I was just reaching for a story. I had something pop in my head, and I wrote it. I can't help what pops in my head when I write stuff. So I've written children's books. I've written a couple of children's books. I can't help what pops in my head. I just write it. It pops in my head, and I write it.
Why did they high schoolers get engaged and pregnant?
Why did they? Because they loved each other and they had sex.
Okay.
I don't know, honey. Really, it's just where I took the story. When I start writing, I have to make things blend in with other things all the way. Then, so the story keeps having a story. So it adds more to the story, and so it keeps an interest. So I don't know. I really can't explain it that well because I just have ideas and I try to go with whatever's in my head. It's just that's why I don't like it when I get writer's block, because usually when I write, it just as I'm writing, because when I write a book, I'll hand write it, because as I'm hand writing it, it'll just keep going, so I can just keep on writing. So it's like the thought doesn't stop. It just turns into a story of its own. So, but it's like if I sat down and typed it out, I'd have to stop because I'm not able to think as well as I am when I'm handwriting it, because when I'm handwriting, I've got that time, and I'm writing it all out and thinking at the same time of where it's going to go and what's going to happen next. So it just winds up turning into a story of its own when I'm handwriting. If I'm sitting down typing it, that's what I do is type it and then I stop and think. Then it takes me a lot longer to write it. Okay.
The preceding announcement has been paid for by the
Lawn World Order.